Good morning, Ohio State fans, and welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Friday, August 22nd. I'm joined once again by the deputy editor at 11 Warriors. I call him the deputy. He doesn't let anybody else call him the deputy, but he does let me do it. The deputy, Dan Hope. How you doing today, sir?
Doing good, George. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Looking forward to the weekend, even though I just got back from vacation, as I detailed yesterday in the Dubcast return. But, happy Friday to everybody. And it's the end of another work week. And it feels like I've been closing every show by saying we're counting down the days, but now we are pretty much within a week. So
this is like the last weekend, and then it's football season.
We're counting down the days on our fingers at this point, not just in our head. So with that in mind, it is time for another edition, the first 2025-26 season edition of the 11 Warriors Buckeye 20. I know you always get a kick out of rounding up the staff opinions to aggregate these rankings together and figure out where the site stands. I don't think that these are going to be published by the time that this goes out Friday morning. That being said, you were gracious enough to let us do a little bit of a tease here. So I do want to ask you a few questions about how things shook out relative to just your thoughts and perspective on it. So my first question would be, and I'm not going to spoil all the rankings, so if you want the full set of rankings, you're going to have to check back with 11warriors.com in the near future. That being said, of the 20 guys that made this list, because you can only have 20, there's a lot of names that get left off. Which one were you most surprised got left off of the top 20 and probably snuck into the honorable mentions?
Well, I mean, it's such an interesting year preseason to do this because, I think, when people see the voting results, which will, either be published, sometime today or this weekend on 11warriors.com, there was really a clear top five, and people can probably guess who those top five. I mean, I'm not going to be breaking any news to tell the people that Jeremiah Smith
Nick McLarty
is
number one.
And Nick McLarty just getting edged out. No, Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs are number one and number two. No surprise there. And then you have Sonny Styles, Carnell Tate, and Max Clare. Those are really, in the voting, those were the very clear-cut top five. Pretty much everyone on staff had some variation of those five in their top five. After that, there's so many guys on this team that are talented yet unproven. But when I was making my ballot, I'm like, man, 6 through 20 is tough because I kind of wrote out my list of candidates first and then ranked them. And I had 30 guys on the list because there's a lot of talented players on this team. There's a lot of guys who I think could be really good players on this team, but so many of them are unproven as of now that it was a lot of kind of splitting hairs, a lot of kind of projecting when I was making my ballot. But, I think, something we saw kind of in the balloting is there was kind of a group of, if you look at the gaps in the voting, the biggest gap was from 5 to 6 and from 18 to 19. There was a group of 18 guys that just about everybody had on their ballots. And then the last two spots kind of varied a good amount. The two that ended up making the cut were Jalen McClain and CJ Donaldson as those last two spots. But then there were, I think, 10 other guys who received at least one vote. And I know for me, the two guys that I had on my ballot that didn't ultimately make the top 20 were Mylan Graham and Caden Curry. And I think, Mylan Graham didn't end up making the cut because of the fact that he's not going to be a starter this year. He's going to be the number 4 receiver on the team. And so, there's kind of that question of how much is he actually going to play, especially when two of the guys he's competing with targets for are top 5 players on the team in Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. But I do think pound for pound, if you're just talking about the 20 best players on the team, I think Mylan Graham is probably one of the 20 best players on the team. He might not be one of the 20 most important or impactful players on the team this year because of how stacked Ohio State is at wide receiver. But I think if you were just picking the 20 best players, the players that, you were other teams in college football and you could grab players off the Buckeyes roster, I think Mylan Graham would be in that top 20. So I was a little bit surprised he didn't get more love from the rest of the staff in the balloting process. And then Caden Curry's a guy, I think if you had asked me a couple weeks ago, I would have said that I thought Bo Atkinson would be Ohio State's number 2 defensive end this year after Kenyatta Jackson. Now I'm not so sure, because a lot of what we've heard the last couple weeks has been Kenyatta and Caden are the 2 guys really stepping up as the leaders in that room. Kenyatta, I think, is pretty clearly right now viewed as the number 1 defensive end on this team. But Caden's a guy as well that I think Ohio State's very high on and believes that, he can, be a very quality player for Ohio State this season. And so, I think there's a lot of guys that are kind of in that group that it's kind of splitting hairs between them. But those were the 2 for me that I would have thought, would be top 20 players that ultimately didn't end up making the cut.
Well, I was very high on Mylan Graham coming out of the spring game. I don't know how you couldn't be. It felt like he was probably the MVP of that game, or certainly at least the player that impressed the most relative to everybody else on the field. So I was kind of very hopeful that he might even push Brandon Inniss a little bit for the wide receiver 3 spot. It doesn't seem like that's going to shake out, or that it's not going to happen. And obviously, the wealth of talent in that room, a problem like this was probably inevitable to a certain extent, but I do hope that he's somebody that they can at least find a way to get involved before garbage time this season, just because I agree with you that I think he is that talented.
You should have submitted a ballot. He might have made the top 20.
Listen, man, I went very hard for Josh Fryer 2 years ago, and I got a lot of grief for it from the staff. And after that, I said, okay, you know what? I'm done putting my opinion out there. That's it. I refuse to do it again. No, I'm kidding. But I can, we'll let. I don't like doing preseason rankings just because we don't have any data to go off. Let me get a couple games out of the belt and see how everybody's doing on the team and who's actually getting out on the field, and then I'll come to bat for Mylan Graham and the rest of the guys. And
I think the rankings this year particularly could change a lot from the preseason to the first in-season update, because again, there's just so many guys on the team this year that they're stepping into bigger roles, but they're talented but unproven. So I would anticipate, the top 2 guys, you'd think like there's probably a very good chance they're still going to be the top 2. But I think after that, you could see a lot of changes this year.
Well, so here's one that I'm already looking at that I thought was kind of interesting. I was totally expecting the consensus to be that the best offensive lineman coming back to this team this year was going to be Carson Hinzman on the sheer value of experience alone. And it surprised me that, again, we're not going to reveal all of the rankings, but one of the players in the top 10 is Austin Siereveld. And he is, in fact, 7 spots higher than Hinzman is on this list. That was the big, and when you were talking about, the chasms and the power gaps between these areas of ranking, it surprised me that there was that much of a power gap between Ohio State's best offensive lineman and the offensive lineman that I think a lot of people were expecting to be the best talent returning to this unit this year. So I'm curious for your thoughts on that. Do you agree? Were you surprised by that? Or are you convinced, based on what you've seen at camp, that going into the season, Siereveld is the best guy that they've got up front?
I'll be honest, the top offensive lineman on my ballot was actually Luke Montgomery. I actually think if I was picking right now who I think is going to be the top offensive lineman this year, I would pick Luke Montgomery.
Who was also in the top 20, by the way, but behind Siereveld and Hinzman.
Yes. And again, the least proven of those guys in terms of, he only, really played like in the CFP. I mean, before the CFP, he really barely played. Then he ended up becoming a starter. But just the way that he finished last season, the way he really kind of took off in the CFP, I mean, I think he was one of the best offensive linemen on the team in the CFP. That was why he ultimately supplanted Austin Siereveld in the starting lineup for those final 2 CFP games. And so for me, like actually sitting here right now, predicting who I think the best offensive lineman for Ohio State is going to be this year, my pick is actually Luke Montgomery. Now, with that being said, I think with Austin Siereveld, it's really just a product of everything that we've heard about him leading up to this season. I mean, you're talking about a guy who was an Iron Buckeye for both winter and summer workouts. The other two guys who earned that honor twice were the number one player on the team, Jeremiah Smith, and Sonny Styles, who came in at number 3 on the ranking. So that's good company to be in. And then just the fact that, you go into preseason camp, it's like Austin Siereveld, maybe he's the right tackle, maybe he's a guard. Now he's the starting left tackle. Like, it's clear Ohio State has seen stuff from Austin Siereveld this offseason that makes them believe he is going to be a stalwart for this offensive line. So personally, I didn't have Austin as high on my ballot as most of the other staffers did, because when I personally put my ballot together, I was going more off of what we've already seen from the players, less so than projecting what they could be. And so for that reason, I had Austin lower, because I think last year he was a good but not great guard, and now he's moving out to left tackle. So I still want to see it before I can really say the guy's a top 10 player on the team. But if everything that the coaches have said about him all offseason is true, then he probably will be a top 10 player on the team.
It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. And yeah, like you said, I think that this has the potential to be one of the more dynamic sets of rankings in this capacity that 11 Warriors has done in recent years. So I'm not sure when you're planning on doing the second. I usually do it, I think, every month or so, right?
Yeah, I don't know that we've made a final decision on that yet. Typically, we do it at the 4-game or the 6-game mark.
Right.
So it'll be somewhere in that range after, the third or fourth or sixth game. We're still kind of determining that.
Well,
but
a month or a month and a half from now, we will have another edition of the rankings to tease for you here on the Dubcast, and Dan hope to walk us all through it. So I'm looking forward to it. Dan, enjoy your final weekend of peace before the long autumn begins. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you are too, to a certain extent. But yeah, the season is almost upon us, and we got just one more weekend to wait it out. So thank you very much for joining us on the 11 Dubcast today, and we will be back next Monday with Chase Brown. Until then, have a great weekend. For Dan Hope, I'm George Eisner. Take care, folks.